My wife stole $200, $0 from our joint account, then secretly sold the family home behind my back. Now she's saying I have no right to the property or the money, and the court case is tearing our family apart. Hello everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, trying to piece together the mess my life has become. It all started with a gut feeling that something was off. My wife, Lisa, had always been a bit controlling and manipulative, but lately she'd been acting strange, secretive texts, late nights, and this weird tension in the air. I dismissed it at first, telling myself I was just paranoid, but then I started noticing the small things that added up. One evening, I decided to check our joint bank account just to see where we stood financially. I wasn't expecting shock, anger, or betrayal. What I saw was staggering. Over the last few months, Lisa had managed to siphon out over $200, $0. The money was gone, transferred into accounts I'd never heard of, investments I didn't approve, and a few large cash withdrawals. It felt like a punch to the gut. How could she do this to us, to me? But that wasn't even the worst part. As I dug deeper, I found out she sold the family home behind my back without telling me, without discussing it. She listed it, negotiated the sale, and closed the deal all on her own. The house that I'd worked so hard to pay off, that we'd raised our children in, was now gone. All of it gone without my knowledge or consent. I confronted her that night, trying to get some answers. She told me she was tired of living in that dump and wanted a fresh start, but her tone was cold, dismissive. She insisted she had every right to sell the house because she claimed I wasn't contributing enough, that I'd been absent emotionally, and that she deserved more. She spun stories that made no sense, trying to turn everything around on me as if I was the one at fault. I was furious, crushed and confused all at once. How could she betray me like this? How could she steal our life savings and sell our home without even talking to me? It felt like she'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, her lies, her deflections, her blatant manipulation. It was like I was talking to a stranger, not the woman I'd loved for over a decade. And in the back of my mind, I kept wondering, how long has she been cheating? Because nothing about her behavior added up. The emotional impact hit me hard. I felt betrayed on every level: trust, love, security. I spent nights lying awake, replaying everything, trying to understand how I missed all the warning signs. Was I blind? Was I stupid? The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who was willing to lie, cheat, and steal from her own family. I was angry at her, yes, but more than that, I was devastated. Our marriage, our life, everything we built together was unraveling before my eyes. I knew I had to make a decision. Could I forgive her? Could I rebuild what was broken? Or was this the end of the line? The betrayal cut so deep I didn't see how we could come back from it. But one thing was clear: I couldn't let her get away with this. Not without consequences. I started thinking about how to fight back, how to get justice, and how to protect what was left of my dignity after all this. I knew I had to act fast, but I also had to brace myself for what was coming next. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and endless thoughts racing through my head. I kept going over everything I found out, trying to piece together how it all happened so quickly and how I hadn't seen the signs sooner. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, mainly at myself for not catching on earlier, but also at Lisa for betraying me so completely. I decided I needed to confront her again, face to face, and get some straight answers, though deep down, I knew I probably wouldn't get the truth. I called her at work, and she answered with that fake sweet tone she used when she wanted to pretend everything was fine. I told her I wanted to talk that evening, and she agreed, acting like she had no idea what I was upset about. When she got home, she was dressed up, makeup flawless, like she was going out on a date. That should have been my first clue that she was hiding something even bigger. We sat down in the living room, and I didn't waste any time. I laid out everything I'd discovered: the money, the house, the accounts she'd opened, the sales she'd made. Her reaction: She scoffed, rolled her eyes, and then threw out the most ridiculous excuses I'd ever heard. "You're overreacting, John," she said, crossing her arms. "That money was just some savings I was planning to use for myself. You're too busy with work to notice what I do with my own money." She insisted she had every right to sell the house because I'd been absent emotionally, which was a lie. I was busy, but I was still there, still trying to support her. When I pressed her about the affair, I'd started noticing signs of more secretive texts, late nights, her phone always locked. She laughed it off, saying I was paranoid. She claimed she was just talking to a coworker, a guy named Mark, and that they were just friends. But I knew better. I'd seen the messages, the flirtatious tone, the way she'd be quick to hide her phone whenever I came near. Her lies kept piling up. She insisted she hadn't cheated, that Mark was just a colleague, but I could tell she was lying. That look in her eyes, that defensive edge, it all pointed to something more. And honestly, I didn't care if she was sleeping with someone else. Her betrayal with the money, the house, and the lies was enough to shatter whatever trust we had left. I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. How could she do this? How could she betray us like this? I thought I knew her, but now I wasn't sure I knew anything at all. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone cold, calculating, and willing to destroy everything we built. That night I stayed up, trying to decide what to do next. I knew I couldn't stay silent, not after all this. I had to protect what was mine, what I'd worked so hard for. I started thinking about lawyers, about how to get my hands on the money, and more importantly, how to stop her from doing further damage. I felt betrayed, angry, but also a strange sense of clarity. This was war now. The next day, I started making calls. I contacted a lawyer I knew, someone who specialized in family law and financial disputes. I needed to understand my rights, what I could do to stop her from selling our property or hiding assets. I also began gathering evidence, screenshots of bank statements, emails, anything that could prove her deception. I couldn't let her get away with this, not without consequences. And then there was the matter of the affair. I wasn't ready to confront her about that directly yet, but I knew I had to prepare myself. If she was cheating, if she was lying about everything, then I had to be ready for whatever came next. I was hurt, yes, but I was also furious. Furious that she'd put her own greed and desire above our family, above our vows. In the meantime, Lisa kept up the act of being innocent and betrayed, playing the victim whenever I pressed her. "You don't understand me," she'd say, or "you're just jealous because I'm trying to find happiness." That bitchy tone, that condescending attitude, it made me want to punch her. But instead, I kept my cool, knowing that my next moves had to be calculated. I realized that I was no longer just fighting for the money or the house. I was fighting for my dignity, for the truth, and for whatever was left of the marriage that I once believed in. I knew I had to keep my head clear and focus on what mattered, getting justice, and making her understand she couldn't just walk all over me. The game was on, and I was ready to play it to the end. Over the next few days, everything seemed to spiral even further out of control. I stayed up nights poring over bank statements, emails, and texts, trying to find some piece of evidence that would crack her story wide open. Meanwhile, Lisa continued to act like nothing was wrong, throwing fits when I questioned her, accusing me of paranoia and trust issues. She'd call me controlling, jealous, and insecure, classic gaslighting tactics. But I knew better. I knew she was hiding something big, and I was determined to uncover it. One morning, I decided to go through her phone. I figured that if she was hiding an affair, there'd be some proof there. I wasn't proud of invading her privacy, but I felt like I had no choice. I knew she'd lie, deny, or delete anything incriminating, but I had to try. I waited until she left for work, then snuck into her purse and grabbed her phone. As soon as I unlocked it, I saw the message thread with Mark. The flirtatious tone, the suggestive comments, there was no denying it anymore. They'd been talking about meeting up, about secrets and hiding feelings. I felt sick, like I'd been punched in the stomach all over again. That discovery was the tipping point. I knew I had to confront her about the affair directly. I waited until she was home that evening, then called her into the living room. I laid everything out, what I found, the money gone, the house sold, the affair. Her face twitched, and for a moment I saw genuine panic. But then she smiled that fake, bitchy smile and told me I was crazy, that I was seeing things, and that I was just jealous because she'd found someone who actually cared about her. Her reaction made my blood boil. She was so good at lying, so good at twisting everything around. She told me I was overreacting, that I was possessive, and that I needed to get help. She even accused me of cheating, that I'd been distant and that I was projecting. But I knew the truth, and I wasn't going to let her gaslight me anymore. I pulled out the screenshot of her messages with Mark and put it right in front of her, her face drained of color. "You lied to me about everything," I said, voice trembling with anger. "The money, the house, the affair. You've been cheating and stealing from us. How could you do this?" She looked stunned at first, then furious. "You don't understand, John," she spat. "You're just jealous. I was going to tell you eventually, but you're so controlling. I needed to get out before you ruined everything." I couldn't believe her words. It was like she was trying to justify her betrayal, like she thought she had some right to do whatever she wanted. I felt betrayed on every level, but I also felt something else, determination. I knew I couldn't stay with her anymore, not after all this. I had to protect myself, my finances, and what was left of my dignity. That night, after she stormed out to clear her head, I sat alone, realizing that my entire life had been turned upside down. I knew I had to act fast. I contacted my lawyer again, explained everything, and started preparing legal documents to stop her from selling the house or moving the money around. I also thought about getting a forensic accountant to trace the stolen funds and figure out exactly where she'd hidden the rest. As I sat there, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of pain, anger, and resolve. The woman I loved had turned into someone I barely recognized, greedy, manipulative, and willing to destroy our family for her own gain. I wondered how long she'd been planning this, how many lies she'd told, and how much more she'd hidden from me. I knew I couldn't trust her anymore, not after this. The worst part, I still loved her somehow, but love wasn't enough to fix the damage she'd done. I had to think about what was best for me now, whether that meant fighting to get my money back, trying to salvage what I could of our marriage, or finally walking away. Whatever I decided, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her get away with this without facing serious consequences. The game was just beginning, and I was ready to play it to the very end. The legal process moved faster than I expected once I handed everything over to my lawyer. The moment I filed the paperwork to freeze the accounts and halt any further sale of the house, I felt a little sense of relief, like I finally took control of the situation after feeling so powerless for days. But that relief was short-lived. Lisa, of course, started pulling out all the stops to manipulate her way out of it. She called me nonstop, crying, yelling, accusing me of ruining her life. She claimed I was trying to control her, that I was jealous and paranoid, and that I was destroying our family for nothing. She insisted she was the victim, that I was the one who was abusive and possessive, and that I had no right to the house or the money anymore. The audacity of her lies, she was convinced she could spin her way out of it, that I'd somehow be the bad guy for uncovering her betrayal. Meanwhile, I had to keep my focus. I had to gather all evidence I could, bank statements, emails, text messages. I even hired a private investigator to look into her financials further. Turns out, she'd been hiding more than just the money and the house. She'd opened multiple offshore accounts, transferred funds to secret accounts in her sister's name, and even bought herself a new luxury car with stolen money. The more I found out, the more I realized she was planning to run, to disappear with everything she'd stolen. One of the most shocking moments came when the investigator handed me a report showing she'd been in contact with a real estate agent in another state, trying to buy a property under a different name. I couldn't believe her audacity. She was trying to start over, like she could just erase her lies and betrayal. That's when I knew I had to act fast or she'd slip away with everything. The court hearings were brutal. Lisa showed up, looking bitchier than ever, dressed to impress, trying to act innocent. She kept insisting she was the victim, that I was ruining her life, and that she deserved the money and the house because she was more deserving. I couldn't believe the nerve. I sat there, listening to her lies, feeling a mix of rage and heartbreak. The judge wasn't convinced easily, but I had enough evidence to get a temporary restraining order, freezing her assets and preventing her from selling or transferring anything. It was a small victory, but it didn't feel like enough. I knew I'd have to fight her in court for the full rights to the property and the money. I also had to prepare for a messy divorce, which I knew wouldn't be easy, especially with her fighting dirty. The emotional toll was heavy. I was exhausted, betrayed, and furious. Every time I saw her smirk or flash that fake innocent look, it made me want to scream. But amid all the chaos, I realized something. I wasn't going to let her ruin me. I was going to fight for what was rightfully mine, my money, my home, my dignity. I started leaning on friends and family, trying to stay grounded. I even began therapy because honestly the emotional damage was worse than I expected. I'd loved her for so long, and now I was fighting to keep what was left of myself. One night I sat alone, staring at the legal documents and the evidence I'd gathered. I thought about all the moments we'd shared, good and bad, and how they'd been tainted by her greed and lies. I wondered how she could be so cold, so calculated. I felt a deep sense of betrayal, but also a flicker of resolve. I knew I had to see this through, no matter how ugly it got. I owed it to myself to reclaim my life and make her face the consequences of her actions. The hardest part, accepting that the woman I once loved might never come back. That part still hurts, but I also knew I couldn't keep living in denial. I had to face the reality that this was the end of our marriage, and maybe the beginning of a new chapter where I finally took control of my life again. The court battles dragged on, and every day felt like a new punch to my gut. Lisa, of course, fought tooth and nail, trying to spin everything against me. She claimed I was a bad husband, that I'd neglected her emotionally, that I was trying to control her. She even brought up old arguments, trying to paint me as the villain in our story. But I had the evidence and I had the truth. That seemed to matter little to her. She just wanted to win, to walk away with everything she'd stolen. During one hearing, she sat there, smirking at me as her lawyer argued that she had every right to sell the house and keep the money. I felt my blood boil. The judge looked at her with skepticism, especially after I presented the bank statements, the emails, and the private investigator's report. The judge issued a preliminary order, freezing her assets, halting any further transactions, and appointing a court-appointed receiver to manage the sale of the house if it came to that. Meanwhile, I was trying to keep my life together. I moved out of the house temporarily, staying with a friend while I sorted through the mess. The house, once a symbol of stability, now felt like a prison full of memories, lies, and betrayal. I'd walk through it sometimes, feeling the weight of everything she'd stolen and sold behind my back. It was hard to believe that woman, the woman I loved, could do something so cold and calculated. One day, I finally sat down with the lawyer and laid out my plan. I wanted to push for full recovery of the stolen funds, get her held accountable for the illegal sale of the house, and secure my rights as the rightful owner of our assets. The lawyer told me I had a strong case, especially with the evidence I'd collected, and that we could push for a full settlement in court, including punitive damages for her fraudulent actions. But even with the legal wins, I felt hollow. The emotional toll was overwhelming. I kept replaying moments in my mind, her lies, her manipulations, the way she sneered at me when she thought I was vulnerable. It was hard to process that the woman I'd loved for years had become this person, capable of such betrayal. I felt a mix of sadness, anger, and a strange sense of relief that I was finally taking control. The most surreal moment came when she called me out of the blue, trying to make a deal. She said she'd give me a cut of the money if I dropped the lawsuit, if I just walked away and let her start fresh. That was the moment I realized she was still trying to manipulate me, even now. I told her to save her breath and that I'd see her in court. I knew that her trying to buy her way out or bribe me wouldn't work. I wanted her held accountable for everything she'd done. As the trial date approached, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and hope. I knew this was the final chapter of the fight, but I also knew that her scheming wouldn't end easily. I prepared myself for more lies, more dirty tricks, and perhaps even some last-ditch efforts to escape justice. But I was ready. I'd come too far to back down now. Looking back, I realize how much this ordeal has changed me. I used to believe in love and trust, in the idea that marriage was forever. Now I see how fragile everything can be when greed and deception come into play. I've learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even if it costs you everything you thought you knew. And I've learned that at the end of the day, the truth will out, no matter how much someone tries to lie their way out of it. The court hearing finally arrived, and I remember walking into that courtroom feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and a faint glimmer of hope. The room was packed. Her side, my side, lawyers, witnesses, and even some of our friends and family. I knew this was the culmination of everything: the evidence, the lies, the betrayal, and the fight for justice. As Lisa sat there, her usual bitchy smirk was replaced with a nervous glare. She knew she was cornered. The judge listened carefully as my lawyer laid out the case with all the evidence I'd gathered. The bank statements showing the missing $200, $0, the sale of our house without my knowledge, the offshore accounts, the messages with Mark, and the private investigator's report. Everything pointed to her deliberate fraud, theft, and deception. When I took the stand, I kept my composure, but inside I was boiling with anger and hurt. I told the court about the emotional toll her betrayal had taken on me, how I'd loved her, trusted her, and believed in our future. I explained how her greed and lies had shattered everything. I emphasized that I wasn't just fighting for money or a house. I was fighting for my dignity, my integrity, and the truth. I made it clear that her actions were not just illegal but deeply personal. They had destroyed the trust and love we once shared. Lisa's lawyer tried to spin her story, claiming she was misguided, that she only wanted a fresh start, and that her actions were somehow justified because I'd been distant. But the judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was too overwhelming. The judge finally ruled in my favor, granting me full access to the remaining assets, ordering her to pay back the stolen money, and declaring the sale of the house invalid. He also issued a restraining order, preventing her from contacting me or trying to hide any more assets. When the verdict was read, Lisa's face crumpled, and she looked like she was about to explode. She shouted, tried to argue, but the judge was firm. I felt a strange sense of relief, knowing that justice had been served, at least in part. I had fought hard and I had won, but the emotional scars would take longer to heal. After the court, I left feeling drained but finally free. I knew I'd have to rebuild my life from scratch, but I also knew I'd come out stronger. I started the process of sorting through what was left, filing for divorce, and reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I also began therapy to work through the pain and betrayal. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to move forward. Looking back, I realize how much I've learned from all this. Trust is fragile and betrayal cuts deep. But I also learned that sometimes you have to fight for yourself, no matter how hard it gets. I learned not to ignore the warning signs, to stand up for what's right, and to never let someone's lies define you. Most of all, I learned that even in the darkest moments, there's a glimmer of hope if you're willing to fight for it. Now I'm rebuilding my life, focusing on myself and my future. I don't know what's next, but I do know I won't let anyone take me for granted again. I've been through hell, but I've come out the other side. And honestly, that's more than I ever expected to say.